In the quiet dawn of history, nestled between the banks of the Hermus River and the gentle curves of the Pactolus Mountains, there rose a land whose name would one day echo through the chambers of civilization, Lydia. This land, in what we now call Western Anatolia, was neither vast in size nor especially powerful in its earliest days. Yet its soul was rich. Rich in rivers that glittered with gold dust. Rich in fertile valleys where olives, figs, and grains grew in abundance. And rich, above all, in a spirit of invention that would one day shape how humans understand value itself. Lydia did not erupt onto the historical stage. It emerged, slowly, steadily, from the tapestry of Bronze Age cultures that populated Asia Minor. Long before its kings minted coins, its hills were walked by Hittites and Luvians, by shepherds and potters, by traders who moved silently from town to town with sacks of goods strapped to their backs. The early Lydians, or Meonians as they were once called, spoke an Indo-European tongue. Their customs were shaped as much by the lands to their east as by the Aegean to their west. They stood at a crossroads, not just of trade, but of thought. It was this crossroads that made Lydia more than a name on a map. While neighboring peoples warred or built, the Lydians watched and listened. They borrowed gods from the Phrygians, borrowed myths from the Greeks, and carved their own identity in stone and soil. Their cities were small but well built, adorned with sanctuaries and market squares. Sardis, their capital, nestled at the base of Mount Pactolus, would become the heartbeat of a kingdom and the cradle of a quiet revolution. The early kings of Lydia were still shrouded in semi-legend. Their names drift to us through the mist: Manes, Atys, Lydas. It was Lydas, the son of Atys, who, according to later Greek accounts, gave the land its name. But these were not emperors in golden robes. They were rulers of tribes, warlords perhaps, who maintained order through kinship and charisma. They worshipped the powers of nature, the sun, the storm, the fertility of the earth, and their lives turned with the cycles of planting and harvest. The world around them was changing. To the east, Assyria thundered forward with iron and fire. To the west, the Ionian Greeks built walled cities and sanctuaries of marble. Yet Lydia remained, for a time, in the soft shadow of others' ambitions. Still, a foundation was being laid. With each passing generation, Lydia grew more centralized. Roads were carved into the hills. Fortresses crowned ridges. Local chieftains were bound into one kingdom under a single line of kings. And along the banks of the golden river Pactolus, a different kind of wealth began to stir, one not measured in cattle or grain, but in the shimmer of metal. The world did not yet know it, but Lydia was on the edge of a great idea. An idea that would change how humans measured worth, how they traded, how they stored trust. But that moment had not yet arrived. For now, Lydia remained quiet, a land between mountains and sea, between east and west, between myth and memory. And yet, it watched. It waited. And in its waiting, history prepared to speak. From the foothills of Mount Pactolus, where mists clung to the stones in the early morning, flowed the river Pactolus, a gentle stream by nature, but mighty in legend. Its waters ran cool and clear, weaving their way past Sardis and into the wide Hermus Valley. But it was not the river's shape that made it famous. It was its shimmer. In its beds, beneath polished stones and grains of silt, there gleamed something rare, flakes of electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver. No other land in the known world possessed such bounty. Travelers would later speak of Lydia as a country where the earth bore treasure without toil, where gold came not by pickaxe or fire but simply by gathering what the river offered. The Lydians did not create their wealth in isolation. Nature had favored them. The Pactolus, fed by mountain snow and rainfall, washed gold down from the heights above Sardis, where veins of ore threaded the rocks. Over time, this electrum collected in the riverbed, polished and scattered like seeds from the hands of the gods. In early Lydia, wealth was measured in weight, of metal, of livestock, of grain. Barter prevailed, and trade moved slowly. Electrum, in its raw form, was valuable, but difficult. Each nugget varied in content. Some pieces were rich in gold, others in silver. No two were the same. To use it in commerce meant testing, weighing, guessing. A merchant might hesitate. A farmer might mistrust. And so, even in a land rich with treasure, uncertainty dulled its edge. But this uncertainty would not last forever. The Lydians were observant. They watched how men hesitated when no standard existed, how mistrust slowed trade, how disputes broke out over uneven exchanges. From these observations, a quiet resolve began to form, not only to gather wealth, but to shape it, to tame it, to make it speak with one voice. Meanwhile, Sardis flourished. It was more than a capital. It was a place where paths converged, merchants from Phrygia, artisans from Ionia, and emissaries from distant lands all met beneath its walls. The city sat where the hills fell away into the plains, a natural stronghold, crowned by an acropolis and nourished by rivers that brought life and wealth. Within its markets, fabrics changed hands, livestock were inspected, and goods of all kinds moved between wooden stalls. Yet still, the problem remained how to make trade smoother, more reliable, more trusted. The Lydians had the metal. They had the means. What they lacked, until now, was the method. And so, as merchants weighed clumps of electrum and debated their purity, a question stirred in the minds of Lydia's rulers and craftsmen alike. What if this gold-silver alloy could be formed, shaped, given a fixed weight and a known mark? What if trust could be cast in metal? The answer was not far. The land itself had already provided the material. All that remained was the will, and the vision, to shape it. Lydia, land of rivers and riches, stood at the brink of transformation. The Pactolus would soon offer more than gold. It would offer a future. The Lydians were not a people born from conquest, nor were they shaped by a single great event. Rather, they emerged over centuries, from the weave of older Anatolian tribes, from the ashes of the Hittite collapse, and from the slow fusion of cultures along the Aegean's eastern edge. They were not the largest kingdom, nor the loudest. But they endured. And in time, they came to lead. They called themselves Sphard, though to the Greeks, they would always be Lydians. Their language, now lost but faintly traced through inscriptions, belonged to the Anatolian branch of the Indo-European family. Few could read it even then. It was spoken in the hills and valleys of the Hermus Basin, sung in prayers, whispered in marketplaces, and recorded on stone only in moments of great formality. The Lydian character was one of adaptability. They were not isolated. They traded with the Ionians, neighbored the Carians, and held ties, sometimes friendly, sometimes strained, with the Phrygians and Mysians. Their artisans borrowed techniques from the Greeks, while their temples bore traces of Eastern influence. They honored a goddess, Cybele, in a form akin to that of the Mother of Mountains, a figure older than empires, older even than writing. In this land of mixed voices, kingship slowly hardened into dynasty. At first, the line of kings was vague, clothed in myth. Names like Manes and Lydia appear in later Greek accounts, half legendary, their deeds unclear. But by the 8th century BCE, the kings of Lydia were more than tribal elders. They ruled from Sardis with authority recognized by neighbors. The city, perched on a plateau with steep cliffs for walls, served not just as a capital but as a symbol, a place of refuge, command, and continuity. Then came the House of Memnads. This dynasty began with a man named Gyges. His rise to power was sudden and, some said, violent. Herodotus would later spin the tale of Gyges, the bodyguard, who overthrew his master, married the queen, and took the throne. Whether this was true or not, Gyges did take power around 680 BCE. And with him began the story of Lydia as a true kingdom, ambitious, organized, and increasingly rich. Gyges was no mere usurper. He fortified Lydia's defenses, extended its influence, and began the long, slow centralization of power. He understood the value of alliances and sent gifts to Delphi, hoping to win favor with the Greeks. His reign, though tested by Cimmerian invasions from the north, established a precedent that Lydia was not merely a regional power, but one worthy of notice. He was followed by Sardis, and then Sardis. Each expanded the realm's strength, both militarily and economically. They built roads, secured trade routes, and drew wealth into Sardis. But the true flowering of Lydia, the moment when wealth met vision, would not come until the reign of Aliats and his son, Croesus. For now, though, the stage was set. The people of Lydia, shaped by hills and rivers, had accepted kings to rule over them. The kings, in turn, began to dream of more, of order, of permanence, and of legacy. And somewhere in the royal court, as artisans weighed lumps of electrum and merchants struggled with scales, a new idea flickered. Small at first, like a spark in dry grass. But it would grow. Not just a kingdom of gold. A kingdom of trust. A kingdom where value could be held in the palm of the hand. In the soft dawn of Lydia's recorded history, one name stands firm against the haze of time: Gyges, son of Pactolus. His rise marked a turning point. He was not born into the throne but seized it, and with that act, the Memnad dynasty began, a line that would bring Lydia to its peak and reshape the very concept of wealth. The story of Gyges, as told by Herodotus, carries the tone of fable. It begins in the court of King Candace, a ruler so proud of his wife's beauty that he forced Gyges, his trusted bodyguard, to gaze upon her in secret. The queen, shamed and furious, offered Gyges a choice: kill the king and marry her, or die himself. Gyges chose power. He killed Candace in the night, took the throne, and became king. Whether this tale was literal or not, its truth lay in its effect. Gyges took the crown through action, not inheritance. And from that moment, Lydia began to change. Gyges ruled with both cunning and vision. He understood that survival in Anatolia demanded more than strength. It required diplomacy, strategy, and wealth. In the north, the Cimmerians, fierce nomads from beyond the Black Sea, swept down in waves, burning cities and toppling kingdoms. Gyges fought them, at times successfully, at times not. Sardis itself was threatened, even breached. But it stood. In response, Gyges reached outward. He sent offerings to Delphi, rich gifts of gold and silver, and sought alliances with the powerful city-states of Greece. To the Greeks, Lydia was still a mystery, but Gyges made sure they heard his name. He funded temples, aided allies, and secured his legacy not only with the sword but with generosity. At home, Gyges began to centralize authority. His court grew more organized. Roads improved. Fortresses were strengthened. And most importantly, trade flourished. Sardis sat at the crossroads of inland routes from the east and coastal paths toward the Aegean. Merchants from distant lands now passed through its markets. With them came not only goods, but new ideas about exchange, about measurement, about trust. It was during this period that electrum began to be used with greater seriousness. Traders would weigh nuggets, test them with touchstones, assess their value. But the process remained slow and uncertain. Some believed that it was under Gyges, or perhaps his immediate successors, that the idea of shaping electrum into standard pieces first arose. Not yet coins, but protocoins, lumps of metal, marked with simple stamps, perhaps a lion's head or royal symbol. Small tokens of trust. If so, then the seed was planted under Gyges, even if the fruit would bloom later. He had seen what unstandardized wealth meant, the delays, the disputes, the mistrust. His reign, shaped by threat and opportunity, gave him cause to think differently. Power, he understood, rested not only in the sword or the temple, but in the confidence of a merchant's hand, in the belief that a stamped piece of metal could speak for a king. Gyges died around 644 BCE, perhaps in battle against the Cimmerians. His son Sardis took the throne after him. But Gyges had done more than survive. He had laid the foundations of a kingdom that would soon take a bold step forward. He had not yet invented the coin. But in the soil he tilled, of centralized rule, expanding trade, and growing confidence in royal authority, the first true coinage was preparing to rise. When Gyges fell, the shadow of the Cimmerian threat still loomed over Lydia. His successors, first Sardis, then Sadeouts, held the throne through turbulent years, fending off raids and rebuilding what had been lost. But it was with the ascent of Aliats, son of Sadeouts, that Lydia would enter its golden age, not only in wealth, but in vision. Aliats came to power around 610 BCE. He inherited a kingdom both threatened and promising, strong in its foundations, yet scarred by conflict. His first task was survival. the Cimmerians still swept across Asia Minor in bands of fire and steel. But Aliats, unlike his predecessors, would finish what Gyges had begun. Through determined campaigns and clever alliances, he drove the invaders back. Sardis, which had once seen its lower city set aflame, would never again fall to foreign hands during his reign. In the wake of these victories, a new Lydia began to rise. Aliat ruled not merely as a warlord but as a king of structure. He expanded his territory, pressing westward toward the Aegean and bringing Ionian cities like Smyrna under his influence. He understood the importance of ports, of sea trade, of access to ideas beyond the mountains. Where his father had defended, Aliats built. This growth was not only territorial. Under his guidance, Lydia's economy flourished. Agricultural reforms, tribute systems, and the control of regional trade routes all brought wealth flowing into Sardis. And with it, a question: what to do with so much electrum? The Pactolus river still flowed with golden dust. But now, the challenge was not in gathering the metal, but in making it useful. Traders still hesitated with raw electrum. Each nugget, naturally occurring, varied in its mix of gold and silver. Its value was uncertain, its use inefficient. Weighing and testing slowed every transaction. Even among Lydia's own people, this inconsistency bred frustration. It was here, in this moment of wealth and uncertainty, that Aliats took a decisive step. He ordered that electrum be shaped, not as crude lumps, but as uniform pieces. These were the first true stamped tokens. Each one bore a symbol, the forepart of a lion, often roaring, proud and firm. This was not merely decoration. It was a royal seal, a guarantee. The lion stood for the Myrmnad house, and the stamp declared, "This metal is true." Its weight is known. Its value is trusted. These were not yet coins in the full sense, they lacked inscriptions, and their metal was still electrum, not refined gold or silver. But they were far more than simple bullion. They were the beginning of standardized currency. Each piece, likely issued from a central mint in Sardis, carried the authority of the king. With these, Lydia offered not just metal, but certainty. In creating this system, Aliats gave the world something new. He turned trust into a tool. For the first time, value could be handed from one person to another, not with explanation or proof, but with a small, marked token. It was faster, simpler, more reliable. These innovations were not accidental. They were born from Aliat's deep understanding of power. He saw that authority lay not only in armies or walls, but in the minds of men. And if men trusted the king's word, stamped in metal and passed hand to hand, then the king's reach extended far beyond his palace. By the end of his reign, Aliats had made Lydia not only secure, but central. Trade from the Aegean to the east flowed through its roads. Gold and silver passed through its treasuries. And in the markets of Sardis, for the first time in human history, money, real money, began to move with confidence. Aliats did not invent the coin, but he made it inevitable. The Lydians worked with what the earth gave them. And in the soil of their homeland, particularly along the winding course of the Pactolus River, nature had left a gift, electrum. Electrum was unlike other metals. It was not refined, nor forged by the fires of men. It came raw, born of geological chance, a pale, yellowish alloy of gold and silver, touched occasionally with trace elements like copper or platinum. It sparkled in riverbeds, nestled among pebbles, and clung to the bottoms of pans. It had the luster of gold, but not its uniform color. It had weight, but not certainty. To the early Lydians, electrum was wealth, but also a puzzle. Its gold and silver content varied from piece to piece. A nugget might be rich one day, disappointing the next. Its beauty was reliable, but its value was not. And yet, it was abundant. Nowhere in the known world did electrum flow as freely as in Lydia. The Pactolus, fed by the mountain streams of Tmolus, scoured gold-bearing rock and carried electrum down into the plains. Travelers from distant lands spoke of it in wonder. It was said that the very touch of the water left a shimmer on the skin. The myths, too, surrounded it. In later tales, King Midas, cursed with the golden touch, washed away his power in the Pactolus, thus giving the river its golden burden. Whether myth or memory, the tale captured a truth: Lydia was marked by its electrum. Its fate and its innovation would be tied to this metal. Electrum's beauty made it desirable. Its rarity made it valuable. But its inconsistency made it difficult. Merchants had long used it in trade, but always cautiously. Before any transaction, the metal had to be tested, rubbed against a black touchstone, compared in color, sometimes even cut and weighed. These tests slowed commerce and bred mistrust. Two pieces that looked alike might not be equal. Arguments followed. Deals faltered. The Lydians, observant and practical, began to wonder, could this wild metal be tamed? They had already begun shaping electrum into small lumps, measured by weight, sometimes marked a kind of pre-coinage. But there was no system yet. No standard. Then, under Alliates, came the breakthrough: electrum could be issued by the state, in fixed weights, with consistent markings. The metal was still variable, but if the king's stamp was on it, then the piece was trustworthy. It had been tested. Its value was known. In essence, it was no longer merely metal, it was a message. A guarantee. This was the genius of electrum. Though flawed in composition, it became useful through authority. By standardizing these pieces and declaring their value, Lydia turned a geological oddity into an economic tool. Later generations would refine this system. They would separate gold from silver, create bimetallic standards, and mint coins of great purity. But it all began here, with electrum, nature's alloy, plucked from the riverbed and stamped with the promise of a kingdom. Lydia had found its voice in metal, and that voice was beginning to be heard far beyond its borders. In the world before coinage, every transaction was an act of judgment. When a farmer brought grain to market or a trader arrived with dyed cloth, there were no fixed prices, no coin purses clinking with certainty. Instead, there were scales, weights, and long, cautious conversations. Value was fluid. Trust was fragile. Time was wasted. In Lydia, this was no different until it began to change. Electrum, as plentiful as it was along the Pactolus, presented a challenge. Its composition varied wildly. A single nugget might contain 70% gold, another only 50%. Some merchants knew how to test with touchstones, using streaks of color to guess at purity. Others relied on weight alone. Still, no system could fully guarantee fairness. A crooked merchant could shave a piece, mix metals, or strike a bargain through deceit. Buyers hesitated. Sellers protested. It was a world where suspicion crept into every exchange. Even the noblest efforts to standardize, marked ingots, sealed weights, could not erase the human error and the endless retesting. The process was slow. Trade, especially over long distances, suffered. A man might walk for days to Sardis, only to find his payment questioned, his wares devalued. It was not that people lacked ingenuity, but they lacked a shared language of value. One that spoke not just of weight, but of assurance. One that made metal not just precious, but reliable. This was the hidden genius behind Lydia's leap, the recognition that value was not only a matter of metal, but of trust. And trust, in the ancient world, came from authority. When Aliat stamped a piece of electrum with the royal symbol, most often the lion, emblem of the Mermnad line, he did more than decorate it. He declared, "This metal is verified. This weight is correct. This token bears the word of the king." Suddenly, the balance shifted. Traders no longer had to test each piece. If it bore the lion, it bore the king's promise. Trust became embedded in metal. Exchange became quicker. Disputes, fewer. This change was quiet at first. Not every merchant accepted the new pieces. Some still tested, out of habit or caution. But as these stamped tokens proved consistent, in shape, in weight, in acceptance, confidence spread. Market by market, village by village, the idea took hold. And with it, a new rhythm of commerce emerged. No longer did one need to know the content of a lump or the skills of a metalworker. No longer did each trade begin with doubt. Instead, the stamped electrum passed from hand to hand, smooth and quick, like a word passed in trust. The Lydians had not changed the nature of metal. They had changed the meaning of it. They had turned weight into a message. And in doing so, they had moved one step closer to inventing the coin. It was not a matter of gold or silver alone. It was a matter of belief. And belief, once set in motion, would carry farther than the strongest armies. It was sometime around 610 to 600 BCE, under the steady hand of King Aliats, that Lydia crossed an invisible threshold. What had once been raw electrum, gathered from the river, weighed and debated, became something new, something transformative. For the first time in human history, a government issued metal pieces not merely for weight, but as money, fixed in value, stamped with authority. These were the world's first coins. Small in size and oval in shape, these electrum pieces were unlike anything that had come before. No longer simple lumps of metal or unmarked bars, they were produced with deliberate design. Each piece was struck between two dies, one above and one below, using a blow from a hammer. This pressure imprinted a symbol onto one side, often the lion's head, emblem of the Lydian kings. The reverse bore a set of shallow punches, left by the anvil die, not artistic, but functional, holding the metal steady during the strike. The lion, fierce and unmistakable, was no mere decoration. It spoke for the throne. It was the voice of the king in metal. Wherever the coin traveled, it carried a message: this has been weighed. This has been tested. This has been approved by the House of Mermnad. These early coins came in a range of weights. The most common was the stater, a full unit, weighing around 14 grams. But there were also fractions, halves, thirds, sixths, even down to tiny pieces that weighed less than a gram. This variety allowed for a wide range of transactions, from large commercial exchanges to everyday market purchases. And yet, these were not yet coins in the modern sense. They bore no inscriptions. They did not declare denominations or rulers' names. The electrum itself was still naturally mixed, gold and silver fused together, each coin slightly different in composition. But the stamp made the difference. It replaced the need for testing. It replaced the need for scales. It offered, in metal form, the most valuable thing in trade: confidence. The minting was likely centralized in Sardis, close to the source of electrum and the seat of royal power. Skilled artisans crafted the dies by hand, engraving the lion's form with precision. Hammers struck thousands of coins, each one a small miracle of consistency in an inconsistent world. As word spread, the coins moved, first through Lydia's internal markets, then outward. Ionian traders accepted them. Greek merchants took them home. The stamped coin, born in the valleys of Lydia, began to cross seas. This moment, quiet, practical, almost uncelebrated at the time, marked a revolution. It was not a temple, nor a treaty, nor a war. It was a tool that allowed commerce to grow not only faster, but deeper. That let strangers trade without knowing each other. That let value be stored, carried, and passed on with ease. The world would never be the same. From this point forward, money had a face. And that face was Lydian. Stamped into the soft glow of electrum, the lion's head stared out, proud, unyielding, unmistakable. This image, repeated over and over on the earliest coins of Lydia, was more than mere symbolism. It was the kingdom's voice, the signature of its sovereign, the quiet roar of royal power cast into metal. Why the lion? In the ancient world, the lion stood for strength, authority, and kingship. It was not native to the Lydian landscape. Few, if any, roamed those hills by the 7th century BCE. But in myth and memory, the lion was universal. It adorned thrones, guarded gates, and marked warriors' shields. For the House of Mermnad, the ruling dynasty of Lydia, the lion embodied dominion. By stamping it onto electrum, they declared that every coin bore not just weight, but the will of the king. The artistry of these early coins was spare, but deliberate. The lion was usually shown in profile, its mouth open in silent roar, sometimes with a star or sunburst before its face. These images, simple yet powerful, were engraved by hand into hardened dies. No two were exactly alike, but all conveyed the same message: this metal has passed through royal hands. Unlike later Greek coins, which bore the names of cities or deities, Lydian coinage was anonymous in script, but deeply personal in symbol. The lion was not just an animal, it was the seal of the state. It guaranteed the coin's value and, by extension, the integrity of Lydian commerce. The reverse of the coins was plain, marked only by shallow incuse punches, created by the die that held the blank piece in place. These marks, geometric and unadorned, were functional. But the face, always the face, carried the true meaning. Some scholars believe the choice of the lion had a protective quality as well. Just as royal seals were used to secure documents and jars, the lion stamped into coinage served as a warning: tamper with this, and you defy the king himself. And defiance was costly. The lion coin spread quickly, especially among Greek merchants in nearby Ionia. Their reliability made them useful, their symbolism made them respected. No longer did traders need to argue over purity or guess at weight. The image of the lion did the talking. It is striking how little these coins tried to be artistic. There was no pretense, no flourish. Their beauty lay in their certainty, in the steady repetition of a single royal image, stamped into the metal of everyday life. And so, the lion became more than an emblem. It became an idea that a kingdom could speak through coinage, that rulers could rule not just with laws and armies, but with marks of trust passed from hand to hand. The lion roared not in words, but in silence. And the world listened. Coinage is not simply the act of shaping metal. It is a convergence of material, weight, and symbol into a single object that holds meaning far beyond its form. In Lydia, this convergence was achieved not by chance, but by design. Their earliest coins, crude by later standards, carried within them the full weight of a civilization's new idea. To make a coin, 3 elements were essential: metal, weight, and authority. First came the metal, electrum, the natural alloy drawn from the Pactolus river. It was precious, abundant, and locally sourced. Its unpredictable blend of gold and silver posed a challenge, but Lydia embraced that challenge through standardization, not refinement. Rather than attempting to separate the metals, a difficult and costly process at the time, they accepted electrum's nature and worked with it. Second came weight. Every coin had to be measured with precision. The full stater, about 14 grams, became the standard unit. From this were derived its fractions, the half, the third, the sixth, and so on, all the way to the tiniest divisions, sometimes less than a single gram. These denominations were not marked with numbers, but known by use and feel. Their accuracy was consistent enough that a merchant in Sardis and one in Ephesus could recognize their worth without argument. Weight gave structure to trade. It allowed a shared understanding of value, a framework where goods could be priced, exchanged, and accounted for. In a time when bartering was still common, fixed-weight coinage was revolutionary. It allowed value to move without goods, wealth to be stored without spoilage, and payments to be made without conversation. And finally, authority. Coins were not merely pieces of metal. They were official. Each bore the stamp of the king, most often the lion's head. This mark was not just a decoration. It was a promise, a silent oath. It said, "This piece has been tested. Its weight is true. It carries the honor of the crown." Without this mark, a lump of electrum was uncertain. With it, it became money. This was the leap from precious metal to public trust. The Lydians, through this innovation, created a system where value was not only embedded in the coin's substance, but also in the belief of its users. This belief was not abstract. It was grounded in consistency. When coin after coin bore the same weight, the same mark, and the same reliability, people believed, and belief turned tokens into currency. What began as a practical solution to speed up trade, to simplify exchange, became something far more profound. Lydia had given the world not just coins, but coinage, the system by which states expressed their power in metal, by which economies measured themselves, and by which trust could be stored, carried, and exchanged. It was not gold alone that changed the world. It was certainty, shaped, stamped, and placed into the hands of ordinary people. From the hills of Sardis, that certainty began to flow. With coinage born, the next challenge lay in discipline. Invention alone could not sustain value, only consistency could. And so, the Lydians, under the rule of Aliats and those who followed, turned to the quiet labor of system building. They moved from experiment to establishment, shaping not just coins, but a method, a standard, a culture of trust. Uniformity was the heart of it. Every coin had to match, not in beauty, not in artistry, but in weight and metal. If one stater weighed slightly more than another, doubt crept in. If 1/6 contained more silver than its twin, confidence faded. The promise of coinage, after all, was certainty, the assurance that value held the same meaning across distances and hands. To maintain this, Lydia centralized minting. Most coins came from Sardis, the royal seat, where electrum was gathered, tested, and struck by craftsmen under state supervision. These men were not merely metalworkers, they were guardians of public trust. Their dies, engraved with the lion's head or similar symbols, were used carefully and consistently. When a piece of electrum was too heavy or too light, it was rejected. Only what met the king's standard was allowed into circulation. The die stamping process itself became more refined. The reverse punch, once crude, took on more shape. The obverse image, the lion, the sunburst, the paw, grew clearer. And as coin usage spread, so too did expectations. Merchants began to recognize slight variations. Fractions of staters became more precise. A system of denomination emerged, not written, but understood. What made this possible was the state's backing. Every coin, regardless of size, was a reflection of the king's promise. There was no need for writing, because the image was enough. The symbol was the seal. And so, the coin became not just a tool of trade, but an extension of royal authority. This system spread not by decree, but by use. People trusted the coins because they worked. Farmers used them to pay laborers. Traders used them to settle accounts. Temple treasuries began to collect them. And with each use, the expectation grew that every coin would match its kind. That value would be known before the scale was touched. In this way, uniformity became habit, and habit became tradition. The genius of Lydia was not only in making the first coins, but in shaping a coinage system, one that held firm across time, across borders, across generations. They taught the world that money need not be negotiated each time it changed hands. That a small, stamped piece of metal could speak plainly, without words. They taught that consistency is a kind of power. A quiet power, but a lasting one. And in doing so, they laid the invisible groundwork for every currency that would follow. Before coins, trade was a cautious ritual. A farmer wishing to buy a tool might carry sacks of grain, hoping the smith needed food. A shepherd might offer wool for wine, but only after long debate about fairness. Even when precious metal was involved, in bars, lumps, or rings, every exchange required testing. Scales were unpacked. Touchstones were rubbed. Suspicion lingered. This was the world Lydia left behind. With coinage, exchange became simpler, not in theory alone, but in daily life. For the first time, value could be stored, moved, and spent without argument. A stamped piece of electrum, whether a full stater or a tiny fraction, no longer needed to be questioned. It carried its worth within it, and not just by weight, but by the seal of the king. Imagine the difference. A trader entering Sardis no longer needed to weigh his metal or haggle over purity. He could hand over coins, receive goods, and walk on. A fisherman at the port of Smyrna could accept a few stamped pieces for his catch, then use those same coins to buy cloth, wine, or oil, without ever lifting a scale. Trust moved with the coin. And with trust came speed. This new ease of exchange had ripple effects. Markets grew busier. Trade routes lengthened. Foreign merchants, once wary of dealing in uncertain weights, began to accept Lydian coinage. Some brought it home, introducing the idea to their own cities. Others came specifically to trade in Sardis, drawn by the reliability of its money. Even within Lydia, the economy began to deepen. A class of full-time merchants emerged. Contracts could be settled more quickly. Laborers might be paid in coins instead of goods, giving them freedom to choose how to spend their earnings. The coin created not only efficiency, but choice, and with it, autonomy. This was more than economic growth. It was a shift in how people related to one another. Barter required personal negotiation. Coinage enabled impersonal exchange, a transaction between strangers who never needed to know one another's language, customs, or reputation. The coin spoke for both. Yet even as coins simplified trade, they did not eliminate complexity. Prices still fluctuated. Debt still needed settling. Markets still rose and fell. But with a stable currency, these processes became more manageable. Records could be kept. Agreements could be honored. The economy, once fragile and informal, grew stronger. And so, under Aliats and his successors, Lydia became a land not only of riches, but of circulation, where gold did not sleep in temple vaults, but moved through hands and homes. The coin was not just a symbol of wealth. It was a tool of connection. In simplifying trade, Lydia had done more than ease the burdens of the marketplace. It had laid the groundwork for a new kind of society, one where value moved freely, and with it, the quiet rhythms of daily life changed forever. Perched at the foot of Mount Tmolus, where the Pactolus river met the plain, stood Sardis, not merely the capital of Lydia, but the birthplace of something far greater. Here, in the shadow of its acropolis, coinage was forged. And through its gates, a new idea of value passed into the world. Sardis was an ancient city, long before coins. Its natural defenses, steep hills, stone outcrops, and narrow passes, made it an ideal seat of power. But more than its walls or temples, what defined Sardis was its position. It lay at the convergence of east and west, where inland roads met coastal routes, where Phrygians, Ionians, and Lydians mingled in markets and courts. It was here that Aliats, and later his son Croesus, established the royal mint. This was no ordinary workshop. The mint of Sardis was likely part of the royal palace complex itself, guarded, managed, and supervised under direct authority. Craftsmen worked in stone buildings, where electrum from the Pactolus was purified, weighed, and struck into coins. The process was systematic. Blanks were cut, heated, and hammered between engraved dies. Every step aimed at precision. Every coin a statement of order. The importance of Sardis as a minting center cannot be overstated. Just as Rome would later serve as the imperial mint of an empire, Sardis became the source of the world's first true currency, not in concept, but in quantity, in consistency, in reach. Its coins, stamped with a lion's head and royal seal, spread quickly. Merchants from Miletus, Ephesus, and beyond accepted them eagerly. Their uniformity meant no haggling over weight. Their symbol meant no testing for purity. Sardis became not just a city of kings, but a city of confidence. This transformation elevated the city itself. Sardis grew richer, not only from taxes and tribute, but from the sheer momentum of trade. Foreigners came with goods. Artisans came for work. Scribes kept records, priests offered blessings, and soldiers protected the growing arteries of commerce that radiated from its gates. Temples and altars rose, including the grand sanctuary of Artemis, whose foundations would long outlast the kingdom itself. Roads were paved. Storehouses filled. And beneath it all, in quiet chambers, the hammers rang out, striking metal, shaping trust, one coin at a time. The city's fame spread. To the Greeks, Sardis became synonymous with wealth. Its kings, especially Croesus, would become legends. But before the gold, before the tales, there was the mint, humble in form, immense in impact. From this place, money became a medium. Sardis turned metal into meaning, weight into worth, and trade into transformation. And as its coins journeyed outward, they carried with them not just the wealth of Lydia, but the wisdom of Sardis, a city that dared to give shape to value. In the hands of merchants and travelers, Lydian coins came in many forms, not just the heavy staters that bore the lion's mark, but smaller pieces, neatly divided, each one serving a distinct purpose in the daily rhythms of trade. This was one of the quiet triumphs of Lydian coinage, its thoughtful use of denominations. The standard coin, known today as the stater, weighed roughly 14 grams of electrum. It was the primary unit, the backbone of the system. But few daily transactions required such weight. A farmer buying tools, a herder paying a laborer, or a trader purchasing provisions would need smaller amounts. And so, the stater was broken, not literally, but mathematically, into fractions. There were half-staters, thirds, sixths, twelfths, and even pieces as small as 1/96th of a stater. These tiny coins, though difficult for modern eyes to imagine, were used to pay for goods and services of modest value. Some were scarcely the size of a fingernail, yet still stamped with the royal emblem, a miniature promise of weight and worth. Handling such coins required familiarity. There were no numerals on their surface, no inscriptions. Value was known through size and touch, through repetition and trust. A merchant might recognize a third stater at a glance, its weight and feel etched into his memory. Buyers and sellers learned to stack, combine, and convert with ease. In time, this fluency in coinage became a silent language, a way of thinking in money. The existence of so many denominations reveals something essential about Lydian society. Coinage was not reserved for the elite. It filtered downward, into markets, into workshops, into the hands of those who labored and lived. It served not only grand exchanges, but daily needs. This was not a royal toy or a temple offering. It was a working currency. The royal mint in Sardis produced these denominations with care. Each piece, whether a heavy stater or a sliver of 1/96th, was struck with a similar process, blank heated, die placed, hammer brought down. The image might be simpler on the smaller coins, or compressed, but the authority was no less present. Over time, the use of fractions allowed for complex pricing. Goods could be valued more precisely. Services could be paid in proper measure. And wealth, instead of remaining fixed in large hoards, could be divided, counted, and spent, one piece at a time. This flexibility was essential to the success of coinage. A system without small denominations could not serve the whole of society. But Lydia understood this. Its kings did not simply issue coins. They issued a currency, a fully formed framework that allowed value to circulate at every level. And so, in the marketplaces of Sardis, one might see a merchant accept a full stater for a shipment and moments later hand out sixths and twelfths as change. No scales. No arguments. Just metal, trusted, divided, understood. In these fractions lay the full strength of Lydian innovation. They made money move, not only across kingdoms, but through every corner of life. When Aliats died around 560 BCE, he left behind more than a kingdom. He left a system, quiet, enduring, and profoundly transformative. He had not written laws into stone, nor carved his victories into epic verse. His legacy lay in the rhythm of trade, the clink of metal, the silent trust that passed from one hand to another with each stamped coin. In the market squares of Sardis, in the satchels of traveling merchants, and in the hands of farmers and craftsmen, Aliats lived on. His reign had brought stability to Lydia after generations of chaos. The Cimmerian threat had been repelled, borders had been secured, and the Ionian coast had bent, if not bowed, to Lydian will. Roads were guarded. Markets were full. And at the heart of it all was the innovation he had nurtured, coinage. He had taken raw electrum and given it form. He had created standards where none existed. He had made the king's seal into a symbol of economic certainty. In doing so, he laid the foundation not just for his kingdom's prosperity, but for the evolution of money itself. Yet Aliat's coins were still a first draft. They bore no inscriptions. Their composition varied, depending on the mix of gold and silver in each piece of electrum. Their value, though trusted, was not absolute. But Aliats had begun the process. He had shown that metal could be shaped into trust, and trust into currency. He had turned an idea into practice. Perhaps his greatest contribution was not the coin itself, but the habit it formed. Under his rule, the people of Lydia learned to think in money. They learned to measure value, to count by fractions, to transact without the burden of barter or the weight of scales. A new kind of economy emerged, not merely richer, but faster, freer, more connected. This habit would outlive him. His son, Croesus, would soon take the throne and refine what his father had begun. Where Aliats had stamped raw electrum, Croesus would separate gold from silver. Where Aliats had issued coins without names, Croesus would inscribe them. But without Aliats, there would have been no Croesus. He had given Lydia not only its coin, but its momentum. And so, long after his voice fell silent, Aliats remained, in the brightness of electrum, in the weight of status, in the quiet confidence with which merchants exchanged his royal seal. His was a legacy not of monuments, but of movement. He had turned the flow of the Pactolus into a pulse that beat through the whole of his kingdom. And the world was beginning to listen. When Croesus ascended the Lydian throne, he did so with the eyes of the world upon him. He was the son of Aliats, heir to a kingdom strong and wealthy, a kingdom that had already reshaped commerce with stamped coinage. Yet it was Croesus who would refine that legacy and carry Lydia to its pinnacle. His name, unlike any king before him, would become synonymous with unimaginable wealth. Croesus came to power around 560 BCE. His early reign was marked by consolidation, securing his claim, managing noble factions, and calming the tension that followed his father's passing. But his ambition soon turned outward. He sought not merely to maintain Lydia's position but to expand it through diplomacy, war, and the artful display of wealth. Under Croesus, Lydia's influence stretched further into the Ionian cities of the western coast. He offered patronage, built alliances, and when necessary, applied pressure. His relationship with the Greeks was complex, part benefactor, part overlord. He sent gifts to Delphi, so vast in scale that the Greeks recorded them with awe. Gold vessels, ornate bowls, and solid ingots filled the temple. To the Greeks, Croesus was more than a king. He was a figure of near-mythic opulence. But Croesus' vision extended beyond grandeur. He saw that coinage, already in use under Aliats, could be something more, not just practical, but perfected. The electrum coins of his father, while trusted, still carried uncertainty. The metal's composition varied. Traders accepted them, but always with the knowledge that value was approximate. Croesus changed that. He introduced a fundamental shift in monetary design, refined metal standards. Gold and silver were now separated, purified, and minted into distinct coinages. No longer would a single alloy carry both metals in uncertain ratio. Instead, gold coins were issued in high purity, nearly 98% fine, and silver coins likewise, carefully measured. This transformation made Lydian currency not only consistent in weight, but exact in substance. These new coins, known today as croceids, were stamped with clear symbols, often a lion confronting a bull, their forms locked in tension. Some interpret this image as a symbol of strength meeting civilization, or perhaps Lydia confronting the powers of East and West. But whatever the meaning, the coins carried more than images. They carried the future of money. Croesus had made currency into a tool of statecraft. His mint in Sardis now issued gold and silver in standard units. Trade accelerated. Foreign merchants favored Lydian coins. Neighboring regions, impressed by the precision, began to imitate. The Greek cities, once wary, started minting their own. Through Croesus, Lydia became more than a regional power. It became a monetary authority. Yet his rise was not without risk. To rule in such an age, between the ambitions of Persia and the pride of Hellas, was to walk a narrow line. And Croesus, for all his wealth and wisdom, would soon face challenges no coin could solve. But for now, the king stood at the height of his power. His treasuries full, his influence vast, and his innovation complete. He had taken the gift of his father, the first coin, and turned it into a system the world could follow. And follow it did. To Croesus, gold was not merely a symbol of wealth, it was a tool of clarity. Under his reign, Lydia made a bold and lasting correction to the imperfections of electrum. Where Aliats had accepted the alloy's natural mix of gold and silver, Croesus saw its limitations. He understood what merchants and money changers had long whispered: electrum, though useful, was flawed by uncertainty. Its varying composition made even stamped coins vulnerable to suspicion. The market wanted trust, absolute, measurable, and pure. Croesus gave it just that. For the first time in recorded history, coins were struck not in mixed metal, but in refined gold and refined silver, each purified to high degrees, then weighed and marked with precision. These coins were not experiments. They were a systematic, state-backed reform. Croesus had created what we now call a bimetallic currency system, a full set of coins in two separate metals, minted in consistent denominations. The transition was not simple. It required knowledge, tools, and labor. Purifying electrum meant heating it and separating the silver from the gold, a delicate and expensive process. But Croesus had the resources. The Pactolus still fed Sardis with precious metal, and his court likely attracted the finest metallurgists of the age. With time, the old electrum pieces were phased out. In their place came coins of clarity. The gold croceuid, the most famous of these, became the new standard. It weighed about 1 grams of nearly pure gold and was struck with a now familiar image, a lion and a bull, facing each other, their forms frozen in eternal contest. The silver croceuid followed similar designs, ensuring continuity and familiarity. These changes rippled across the region. Traders who once hesitated now moved confidently. Markets once slowed by weighing and testing now flowed with ease. The coin had evolved from a stamped piece of metal into a measure of pure, guaranteed value. Croesus understood the deeper meaning of this refinement. By removing uncertainty from coinage, he strengthened his kingdom's influence. Each gold coin bore not just a symbol, but a promise that Lydia offered fairness, consistency, and a stable measure of wealth. Foreigners accepted his coins. Allies used them. Even rivals, including the rising power of Persia, took notice. But more than diplomacy or trade, these coins reshaped thought. For the first time, people held in their hands a precise unit of gold, issued by the state, trusted across borders. It was no longer necessary to know metallurgy or own scales. One needed only to recognize the image and feel the weight. In doing so, Croesus moved money beyond the realm of the elite and into the common grasp. The purity of gold was not just technical. It was philosophical. It marked a shift in how value was perceived, not as a vague property, but as a fixed point. It was order in metal, certainty in motion. And it was the work of a king who saw that clarity, more than gold itself, was the true wealth of a nation. The moment Croesus struck his first pure gold coin, the world entered a new chapter. It was small, round, and bright, no larger than a thumbprint, yet it held more than metal. It held a revolution. These coins, now known as croceuids, were the first of their kind, standardized, high-purity gold pieces issued by a state authority. Their weight, about 1 grams, was deliberate. Their fineness, roughly 98% gold, was without precedent. Every element, from the metal's clarity to the coin's consistent image, spoke of a new kind of order, one that made gold no longer a treasure alone, but a measure. The design was simple yet powerful, a lion and a bull, facing each other, locked in silent struggle. This image may have held layered meanings. To some, it symbolized Lydia's might, the lion as royal authority. To others, it suggested balance, or conflict restrained by law. Whatever its interpretation, the coin bore no words, no numbers, only the strength of imagery and the precision of its weight. The minting of these coins required skill and infrastructure. Electrum had to be refined, likely through techniques involving salt cementation, a process that separated gold from silver through careful heating. Such operations were complex, but Lydia had the means, abundant electrum, trained artisans, and the will of a determined king. Croesus did not stop at gold. Alongside these coins, he issued pure silver pieces, similarly crafted, of proportional weight. Thus, Lydia's bimetallic system emerged, two parallel currencies, gold and silver, each minted to a clear standard, exchangeable through known ratios. This system allowed for transactions at every level of society, large payments in gold, smaller ones in silver, all joined by trust in their shared design. For the first time, currency became more than convenient, it became precise. Merchants no longer argued over the nature of the metal. They knew what they held. A crocid in Sardis held the same value as one in Miletus, in Ephesus, in faraway markets where Lydia's voice had never spoken before. This was a turning point. While coinage had existed before Croesus, in stamped electrum, in crude divisions, it had never reached such purity, such reliability, such grace. Croesus had not invented money, but he had given it its first complete form. A true coin, consistent in metal, weight, and authority. These gold coins traveled far beyond Lydia's borders. Greek cities adopted their standards. Persian rulers took note. The coin became a messenger of Lydia's innovation, of its wealth, and of its king. And in that glimmer of gold, the ancient world saw something enduring, a new way to value, to trade, to trust. A circle of metal, stamped by power, accepted by strangers, and passed through time. The first true gold coin was not merely an object. It was a promise. In Croesus Lydia, money was not just made, it was structured. For the first time, a full system of coinage arose, based on the consistent use of two precious metals, gold and silver. This was the world's earliest known bimetallic monetary system, and it reshaped the economy from its foundation. Where Alliats had relied on natural electrum, Croesus refined the idea. He offered coins of pure gold and pure silver, both issued in fixed weights and denominations, both stamped with the royal mark. These were not parallel experiments, but a single integrated structure, a currency designed for all levels of commerce. The gold crocid, weighing approximately 8.1 grams, stood at the top of the scale. It served major exchanges, payments to the court, large trade transactions, tribute from subject cities. The silver crocid, at roughly 10.7 grams, served lesser values. Smaller denominations followed, in both metals, struck in halves, thirds, sixths, and smaller fractions. Each coin matched its counterpart in value. A fixed exchange ratio linked gold and silver, most likely around 1:13.3, that is, 1 unit of gold was worth 13 1/3 of silver, based on the prevailing values in the Mediterranean world. This ratio was known, accepted, and likely maintained by the state. The system allowed merchants and common folk alike to move between metals without confusion or fraud. The innovation was subtle but immense. Now, a person could hold a set of coins of differing metals and sizes and trust that they related to each other in a fixed and understandable way. Gold served for storage and great payments, silver for daily use. And crucially, both were backed by the crown. This dual metal system offered flexibility. It allowed Lydia's currency to function across cultures and economies. Greek cities, which preferred silver, could trade freely with Lydians using silver crocids. Eastern powers, drawn to gold, found the Lydian coin suitable for their standards. The coins became a bridge between systems, not a barrier. It also offered resilience. In times when one metal became scarce, the other could still circulate. The economy remained fluid. Coinage did not depend on a single source or commodity. It was diverse, adaptable, and, above all, trusted. The creation of this system required central control. The mint at Sardis became the beating heart of Lydian finance. Metal flowed in from rivers and mines, was purified, weighed, and struck under state supervision. The coins issued bore not only value but a message that Lydia understood the complexity of commerce and offered a simple, reliable solution. The bimetallic system outlived Croesus himself. When Lydia fell to Persia, the great Achaemenid kings preserved the model, adopting the gold daric and the silver siglos, both rooted in Croesus' weights and purity. The system's logic was too sound to discard. Thus, from a kingdom nestled between rivers and hills, the world received a gift, a currency built not on guesswork, but on reason. Gold and silver, shaped by human hands, joined by a fixed ratio, moved through the world in harmony. And through them, Lydia spoke, in every transaction, in every hand. Though their earliest coins were simple in form, the Lydians soon came to understand that a coin was more than a token of value, it was a canvas of power. Under Croesus, the imagery of coinage evolved. No longer content with plain stamps or abstract shapes, the mint began to refine its designs. Coins became works of art, compact, precise, and symbolic. The lion and the bull, facing each other on the crosiads, were no longer just marks of ownership. They were expressions of identity, of values, of political messages cast in gold and silver. This pairing, lion and bull, was rich in meaning. The lion, symbol of Lydia's royal house, projected strength, sovereignty, and courage. The bull, a creature associated with fertility, storm, and endurance, may have represented the opposing forces of nature or rival powers, Persia, perhaps, or the broader East. Their frozen encounter on the coin surface, heads locked, limbs tense, suggested not mere conflict, but balance. Power in tension. Order sustained through force. The engravers of Sardis, though unknown by name, demonstrated increasing skill. Within the narrow bounds of a coin's face, they managed texture, expression, motion. The lion's mane rippled with detail. The bull's horns curved with deliberation. Each die was cut by hand, a laborious task requiring a sharp eye and a steady hand. No two coins were identical, but all bore the unmistakable touch of mastery. These images were more than decorations. In an age without mass literacy, coins served as messages. A merchant from Miletus or Ephesus, upon seeing the lion and bull design, would recognize the coin's origin and value at once. No words were needed. The image spoke. It reassured. It reminded the holder of Lydia's power, of its reach, of the king's presence in every transaction. Over time, this artistic impulse would spread. Greek city-states, inspired by Lydia, began to craft their own coin images, owls for Athens, turtles for Aegina, Pegasus for Corinth. But the Lydians had shown the way. They had demonstrated that a coin could be both utilitarian and beautiful. That design could enhance trust. That symbolism could endure where speech could not. The artistry of Lydian coinage did not strive for grandeur. It sought clarity and resonance. Each line, each figure, each symbol was chosen with care, not to impress, but to assure. Not to decorate, but to declare. And in that, Lydia achieved something lasting. They turned money into memory. Each coin a statement. Each image a thread in the tapestry of a kingdom's identity. And though the kingdom itself would one day fall, these small portraits in metal, stamped, spent, and saved, would carry its legacy forward, long after its voice fell silent. Lydia, under Croesus, was more than a kingdom of shining metal. It had become an economic engine, a state whose power did not rely solely on conquest or tribute, but on the momentum of trade, the authority of its currency, and the trust it inspired across distant markets. This was new. For in most of the ancient world, kings secured power through land, through armies, through fear. Croesus, while no stranger to warfare, saw that control of money was control of movement or of goods, of people, of influence. The Lydian economy, centered in Sardis, was vibrant. Markets bustled. Merchants streamed in from Ionia, Phrygia, and beyond, bringing olive oil, wine, textiles, and pottery. These goods could be bought, taxed, exported, but only with a trusted medium of exchange. With coinage, Croesus provided just that. He didn't just facilitate trade. He framed it, guided it, measured it. Lydian coinage flowed outward, not only in merchant satchels, but in military payments, diplomatic gifts, temple offerings. The king used his coins as instruments of policy. By funding temples in Delphi and elsewhere, Croesus bought not only favor, but reputation. His wealth became legend, and with it, the Lydian coin became known far beyond the Hermus Valley. Taxation also evolved. Rather than demanding goods or services, Croesus could collect taxes in coin. This allowed the state to store, mobilize, and redistribute wealth with unprecedented flexibility. Soldiers could be paid, artisans hired, roads maintained, all through a system that turned metal into movement. Such centralization of economic control also strengthened the monarchy. The mint, operating under royal oversight, became the voice of the king's economy. No local city could issue coinage to rival the crown. No merchant dared question the value of the stamped lion or the paired beasts of the Croceid. Every piece of currency, in essence, bore the king's approval. This economic power made Lydia formidable, not by sheer size or might, but by efficiency. It allowed Croesus to fund a court of advisors, foreign ambassadors, engineers, artists. It gave him leverage in negotiation and influence across the Aegean. Wealth, once scattered in livestock and grain, was now concentrated, portable, and actionable. And this system gave rise to something deeper, the recognition that money was a form of rule. To hold a coin was to participate in a shared agreement that this symbol meant something, that the king behind it was strong, stable, and trustworthy. Coins created cohesion. They built confidence. And with confidence came growth. Lydia's economic system, still young, was far from perfect. Markets fluctuated. Crops failed. Borders were tested. But the principle, that a state could govern through commerce as well as command, had taken root. Croesus had not simply minted coins. He had minted influence. And Lydia, once a land of rivers and rough hills, now pulsed with the quiet strength of measured wealth. The Lydian coin was not destined to remain at home. From the moment it entered the hands of Ionian merchants, it began to travel over mountain passes, across narrow seas, through the crowded stalls of foreign markets. And as it moved, it carried more than metal. It carried an idea. The Greeks, especially those along the western coast of Anatolia, cities like Ephesus, Miletus, and Phocia, were among the first to encounter Lydian coinage. At first, they accepted it cautiously, as a convenient substitute for the old systems of barter and weighed metal. But soon, the convenience became habit. Then habit became dependence. And finally, imitation. Greek cities began to mint their own coins not long after Lydia introduced hers. These first Greek coins were often crude in comparison, thicker, with simpler designs, but their inspiration was unmistakable. They borrowed the concept, the methods, and even the idea of state-backed value. They, too, began stamping small pieces of metal with marks of identity, weight, and trust. In some places, the designs reflected local pride, a turtle for Aegina, an owl for Athens, a seahorse for Corinth. But the principle remained Lydian, that a stamped coin could replace the uncertainty of trade with the certainty of shared belief. The spread of coinage among the Greeks marked a turning point in their economic development. It allowed cities to fund public works, pay soldiers, build navies. It facilitated internal markets and external trade. It also gave rise to a new form of political life, one in which economic participation extended beyond elites. A hoplite soldier, a stonemason, a farmer selling olives, all could use and understand coinage. It was a leveling force, a common language of exchange. There are records of Greek thinkers, even in the early days, pondering the nature of money. What gave it value? Was it the metal, or the trust behind the stamp? These questions, simple yet profound, had their roots in Lydia's innovation. And so, even as Lydia remained a single kingdom, its influence began to echo through the Greek world. Not through conquest, but through coins. This was perhaps the most elegant form of expansion. The Lydians did not impose their currency. They offered it, and it was accepted. First out of convenience, then admiration, and finally, emulation. By the middle of the 6th century BCE, the idea of coinage had taken root across the Aegean. Greek mints sprang up in city after city. Coins became not only tools, but symbols of autonomy, of pride, of the power to define one's own value. The Lydians had set the example. The Greeks carried it forward. And in that quiet adoption, one city, one mint, one coin at a time, the monetary revolution became irreversible. Legends often rise around great transformations. And in the story of coinage, that quiet but profound shift in how value was measured, one such name emerges from the fog of tradition, Hermodike II. Though the details of her life are scarce, she appears in ancient sources as a bridge between Lydia and Greece. A woman, perhaps of noble birth, perhaps a daughter or relative of the Lydian royal house, said to have carried the knowledge of coinage from Sardis into the Greek world. Her name is not widely known, but where it appears, it is associated with change. According to some traditions, Hermodike too was married into the Greek city of Syme, in Aeolus, a place not far from Lydia, but culturally distinct. There, so the accounts suggest, she introduced the practice of stamped coinage, sharing the insights first developed in her homeland. Whether as royal envoy, diplomatic bride, or simply a woman of vision, her role was remembered as pivotal. And whether the tale is exact or symbolic, it captures a truth: the early diffusion of coinage into the Greek world did not happen in isolation. It came through contact, cultural, commercial, and personal. Hermodike, as a figure, represents that contact. She stands for the many unnamed individuals who carried ideas as they traveled, traders who spoke in multiple tongues, artisans who moved between cities, and yes, women of status who bridged dynasties through marriage and diplomacy. Her supposed influence in Syme is especially meaningful. That city would become one of the first Greek polities to mint coins of its own, crude at first, often bearing a horse's head or simple symbols, but unmistakably based on the Lydian model. These early coins were used not only for trade but for civic purposes, offerings, taxes, payments to mercenaries. And they marked the beginning of a tradition that would soon flourish across Hellas. If Hermodike's story is true, she becomes one of the earliest known agents of economic transformation in the ancient world, not through conquest or decree, but through transmission of knowledge. If her story is legend, then it reflects something equally powerful: the human need to explain great change through personal memory. Either way, she is a symbol. A symbol of the moment when the Lydian invention became a shared tool, no longer the treasure of kings, but the currency of many. And in that quiet gesture, of sharing an idea across cultures, the seeds of a greater monetary world were sown. In the closing years of Croesus' reign, a new power rose on the eastern horizon, the Persians, under the leadership of Cyrus the Great. They moved swiftly, absorbing Media, conquering Babylon, and pressing westward. In 547 BCE, they came for Lydia. Croesus, confident in his alliances and wealth, resisted. His forces met Cyrus in battle. And though he fought with resolve, Lydia fell. Sardis, the city of lions and coins, was taken. The kingdom that had invented money, as the world now knew it, became part of a greater empire. But conquest did not erase Lydia's legacy. It spread it. Cyrus, a master of statecraft, understood the value of what he had inherited. He preserved many Lydian institutions, including the mint at Sardis. The systems built under Aliats and Croesus, the refined gold and silver coinage, the bimetallic structure, the administrative discipline, were not dismantled. They were absorbed and improved. Under Persian rule, the coinage of Croesus became the blueprint for a new imperial currency. The gold daric and silver siglos, introduced during the reign of Darius I, a generation after Cyrus, followed the weights and purity established in Lydia. The imagery changed. The lion and bull were replaced with the image of the Persian king or an archer in royal garb, but the system remained. The mint at Sardis continued to operate under Persian oversight, striking coins not just for the region, but for the empire. From the Aegean coast to the banks of the Indus, coins inspired by Lydia now passed from hand to hand. They paid soldiers, funded infrastructure, and facilitated imperial taxation. In this way, the Lydian model became the Persian standard. And from Persia, the influence traveled further still. The Greeks, who fought and traded with Persia, adopted coinage ever more deeply. The Phoenicians, long accustomed to trade, began issuing coins of their own. Egypt, under Persian rule, saw its temples and treasuries filled with stamped metal, not only grain or gold bars. It is a mark of Lydia's genius that even in defeat, its invention endured. What Croesus had shaped in the valleys of the Hermus, what had once been a local answer to a local problem, now underpinned an empire stretching thousands of miles. And so, through the machinery of Persian power, the idea of coinage, born in Sardis, refined under Croesus, became global. With Lydia absorbed into the Persian Empire, the innovation it had birthed, coinage entered a new phase. No longer a regional tool or royal experiment, it became codified, formalized, regulated, and systematized across vast lands and peoples. The Persians, especially under Darius I, understood the necessity of structure. They ruled a sprawling realm of many languages, customs, and economies. But in coinage, they saw an opportunity to create unity, not by imposing Lydian culture, but by adopting its principles and applying them across their empire. The gold daric, struck to a standard closely following the Croceid, became the empire's high-value coin. It featured a royal figure, often shown as an archer, a visual declaration of power. The silver siglos, used for more common transactions, matched its gold counterpart in proportional value. This pairing preserved Lydia's bimetallic balance, now applied on an imperial scale. But codification went further than imitation. The Persians established official minting sites, set strict weights, and punished counterfeiting. The image on each coin was not chosen by chance, it was consistent, controlled, and unmistakably imperial. Every coin became a small envoy of the king's authority, bearing not just metal but message. This marked a change from Lydia's more symbolic coinage. In Persia, the coin was not just a tool of trade, it was a state document, a declaration of who ruled and what value meant. The process of minting became more bureaucratic, more secure. Weights were carefully maintained. Designs were standardized. And yet, at the core of it all lay Lydia's quiet invention, the idea that value could be shaped, measured, and trusted, not because of its physical substance alone, but because of the seal it bore. This codification brought profound stability to trade. Markets across the empire, from Sardis to Susa, now used the same coinage. Troops could be paid in coin rather than in kind. Taxes, collected in metal, could be stored, transported, and spent with greater efficiency. It also allowed the state to plan. With coinage, treasuries could be managed. Campaigns could be financed. Roads and infrastructure could be funded without reliance on barter or forced labor. Coinage became not merely a reflection of power, but a foundation of administration. In time, even when empires changed hands, from Persia to Alexander's Macedonians, and later to Rome, the principle remained. coinage had become a permanent feature of political life. What Lydia had begun, others continued. And with each coin struck under law, underweight, under symbol, the world inched closer to the systems of money we now take for granted. The quiet logic of the stater and the crochet had become law, not only in Sardis, but across an empire. By the time the 5th century BCE dawned, the Lydian concept of coinage, once confined to a small kingdom nestled in western Anatolia, had spread far beyond its original home. From the shores of Asia Minor to the distant reaches of the western Mediterranean, stamped metal had become the standard medium of exchange. This was not a sudden change. It happened slowly, coin by coin, city by city, driven not by decree, but by adoption. The reliability of Lydian currency had set a precedent. As more Greek city-states began to strike their own coins, the idea of a moneized economy became the new norm. No longer was money a royal invention. It had become a shared civic language. Each city issued coins tailored to its identity. Athenian tetradrachms bore the wise owl and olive branch. Corinthian staters showed the winged Pegasus. The island of Aegina minted its own coins, often marked with a sea turtle, a symbol of maritime trade. These designs varied, but the principle remained unchanged. Weight, purity, and a recognizable symbol formed the basis of trust. This shared structure allowed coins to circulate far from their origin. An Athenian coin could be accepted in Egypt. A Lydian stater might be spent in the Levant. The value of the metal and the familiarity of its design were enough. Over time, markets developed a quiet logic. Coins of known quality were preferred, hoarded, and spent. Those of lesser reputation were discarded or melted down. Coinage also shaped diplomacy. States paid tribute in coins. Mercenaries demanded payment in trusted currency. Treaties specified sums in silver or gold. Wars, once fought for land or pride, were increasingly funded, and sometimes caused, by the need for resources to strike coin. The Phoenicians, masters of maritime commerce, adopted coinage in their colonies, including Carthage. The Egyptians, long reliant on grain and bullion, began to mint under Persian and later Greek influence. In time, even the tribal societies of the Western Mediterranean began to experiment with stamped currency. Through this slow, steady adoption, coinage became the invisible architecture of the ancient world's economy. It did not replace barter entirely. In rural markets and among the poor, goods still changed hands without coins. But for cities, armies, and empires, money had become indispensable. It allowed for taxation, for trade, for savings. It created new professions, money changers, bankers, minters. And behind it all, Lydia's shadow remained. The lion had disappeared from the face of coins, but the logic it represented endured. That value could be trusted. That trade could be simple. That metal, shaped and stamped, could carry the promise of a king or, in time, of a people. The Mediterranean, once a patchwork of barter systems and measured bullion, had become a coin-bearing sea. And every coin that crossed it carried, in its weight and symbol, a faint echo of Sardis. A coin is not just a means of exchange. It is a statement, a miniature declaration of rule, of identity, of vision. From the moment Lydia first struck stamped metal under alliats and creases, the coin became more than money. It became a symbol of authority. To mint coins was to speak to the public in a language of power. It was to say, I govern not only through law or force, but through trust. I define value. I guarantee weight. I leave my mark on what you hold in your hand. For the Lydian kings, this mark was the lion, fierce, noble, unmistakably royal. But as the idea of coinage spread, each ruler, each city, each state shaped its own image to carry that same message. In Athens, the silver owl stood not only for wisdom, but for the strength of democracy and naval power. In Persia, the royal archer was not just a figure, he was the king himself, ready and watchful. In Rome, later, emperors would use their profile to assert dominance, to proclaim victories, to assure the people of their divine right to rule. The coin, therefore, was not only a financial tool. It was a political instrument. It reached farther than edicts. It endured longer than speeches. It moved through every hand, a merchant, soldier, farmer, priest, quietly reinforcing the presence of the state. Even the act of controlling the mint was a form of governance. In many early city-states, only the central authority, whether king or council, could issue coins. To do so without permission was treason. And so, the coin became a measure of legitimacy. A ruler who issued money without resistance was a ruler recognized, if not always loved. The designs themselves often carried messages. Some honored local gods, others marked military victories. Some portrayed unity, others dominance. Each choice was deliberate, shaped not only by aesthetics, but by purpose. A coin needed to be trusted, yes, but also understood. Its image had to speak clearly. Through coinage, the state made itself visible. It turned invisible systems, laws, orders, decrees, into something tactile. Something that jingled in a pocket, that passed from buyer to seller, that lingered even after the ruler had died. In this way, the Lydians had stumbled upon a kind of propaganda more enduring than stone. And long after Lydia itself was gone, the idea it had created, that power could be cast in metal, held in the hand, and spent in trust, remained. Every coin told a story. And every story began with a king's mark. Once coinage took root in Lydia, it transformed not only how people bought and sold, but how rulers governed, how states sustained themselves, and how power was measured in numbers, not just in arms. For the first time in history, commerce and taxation became entwined through the precision of minted metal. Before coins, taxation was a matter of goods and guesswork. Farmers paid in grain, herders in animals, craftsmen in services or tribute. Records, when kept, were imprecise. Collection was slow. Enforcement required presence. The system could work, but only with local rulers who knew their people intimately. Beyond small regions, it faltered. But with coins, the Lydian state found a new path. Now, taxes could be collected in standardized currency. A portion of a merchant's earnings, a farmer's harvest sold at market, or a trader's caravan, all could be measured in coin. The weight was fixed. the value was known. Payment could be recorded, counted, and stored. For the first time, a central authority could build and maintain a treasury not of perishable goods or scattered wealth, but of unified, usable currency. This changed everything. The state could now project power over longer distances. It could hire soldiers, pay them regularly, and expect loyalty. Armies that once fought for spoils could now serve for salary. Coins turned war from a raid into a profession. Cities could pay labours for roads, walls, temples. Craftsmen could be contracted for state work, not with trade goods, but with coin. This opened public works to broader participation. A mason or a miner no longer needed to trade favors or barter food. He could earn coin and spend it where he pleased. In this way, coinage gave rise to a more fluid economy, one where labor, time, and service could be rewarded equally and fairly. And trade itself flourished. Taxes on market stalls, port duties, tariffs on foreign merchants, all could now be levied in coin. Not haphazardly, but in consistent sums. This allowed rulers to anticipate income, plan budgets, and fund projects across seasons and reigns. Economic planning was born, in rudimentary form. The treasury became not just a storehouse, but a tool of power. Coins could be hoarded in times of uncertainty, then spent on rebuilding, on alliances, or on military campaigns. The Lydian kings, especially Croesus, were masters of this. His coins financed diplomacy, enriched temples, supported allies. And when war came, they paid for soldiers, arms, and defense. This shift extended even to religious life. Temples once received offerings of cattle or crops, now they received coin. Sanctuaries like Delphi recorded the vast gifts of Croesus in gold. Priests became stewards of treasure, not just rites. Coin entered the sacred, and with it, the divine began to account in numbers. And so, commerce and taxation, once rooted in the physical and the local, became abstract and universal. The coin made wealth portable. It made value countable. And it gave the state new ways to see, store, and shape the world around it. This was not merely administration. It was the beginning of modern governance, where the pulse of a kingdom could be heard not only in the clash of arms or the cries of the market, but in the quiet shuffle of coins, counted and spent. As coinage spread across the ancient world, it brought with it not only practical change, but intellectual questions. For the first time, people held in their hands small pieces of metal that represented something beyond their substance, a promise, a unit, a shared belief. And with that, a deeper inquiry began to stir. What gives money its value? In Lydia, the answer was clear. Value lay in the trust behind the stamp, the king's seal, the royal weight, the known content of gold or silver. But among the Greeks, especially their philosophers, coinage provoked wider thought. If two coins held equal weight, why did one carry more worth? Was it the image? The authority? The agreement between people? The idea of nomos, or convention, emerged in Greek discourse, the recognition that value is not only a natural fact, but a social one. A coin is not valuable because it is gold alone, but because people agree that it is so. Trust, not just metal, sustains the system. This shift in thought was profound. It opened the door to understanding money as a symbol, not just a substance. Something that stood in place of value, that moved through society not because of what it was, but because of what it meant. Plato, in later centuries, would speak of money as a mere representation, a tool to measure exchange, but vulnerable to misuse if removed from justice. Aristotle would go further, defining money as that which is accepted by agreement, not by nature, but by human choice. In his Politics and Ethics, he explored how money enabled trade, allowed the division of labor, and supported the complex structure of the polis. Yet he also saw its dangers, how it could separate people from real needs, create illusions of wealth, and lead to greed. These early debates began with Lydian coinage. For without a standardized, circulating currency, there was little cause to question the nature of value. Barter was self-evident, one good for another. But coinage introduced abstraction. A lump of silver could now buy grain, sandals, a laborious time, not because it was useful in itself, but because it stood for something trusted. And in that shift, the philosophical imagination was stirred. What else, people began to wonder, was held together by belief? By shared symbols? Could justice, law, and kingship be understood the same way, not as fixed facts, but as social constructs, agreed upon and maintained by collective will? The coin thus became not only a tool of commerce, but a mirror to the mind. It showed that value could be created, transferred, and stored, not by force, but by faith. That trust could become tangible. That a small circle of metal could reshape how people viewed exchange, authority, and even reality itself. Lydia, though silent now, had sparked this journey. And long after its kings had vanished, its greatest invention continued to challenge thinkers, not with weight, but with meaning. Centuries have passed since the fall of Lydia, and yet its voice remains, not in scrolls or carved inscriptions, but in coins. Scattered across museums, buried in earth, found in hoards, the numismatic evidence of Lydia endures. And through it, the world listens still. Modern archaeology has confirmed what ancient writers only hinted at. In the soil of western Anatolia, and in the riverbeds of the Hermus and Pactolus, thousands of electrum coins have been recovered, some no larger than a fingernail, others weighing the full measure of a stater. Their surfaces bear lions, bulls, sunbursts, incuse punches. Some are sharp and unworn, as if struck yesterday. Others are smoothed by use, their images fading but still firm. These coins are more than artifacts. They are data, windows into the economy, society, and statecraft of ancient Lydia. By examining their weight, composition, and design, scholars have traced the evolution of coinage. The earliest pieces, rough and variable, show the trial and error of innovation. Later coins, refined, consistent, boldly stamped, reflect a mature system, likely from the reign of Croesus. The transition from electrum to distinct gold and silver issues is preserved in metal, clearer than in any written record. Their distribution tells a story as well. Coins of Lydian style have been found far beyond Sardis, in Ionian cities, in the Aegean islands, even in the Levant. Some appear in buried hoards, hidden in times of war or flight. Others are found in temple offerings, gifts to the gods. Still more come from graves, placed beside the dead, not as mere wealth, but as tokens of meaning, perhaps to guide the soul or mark the passage from life. Numismatics, the study of coins, has thus become central to understanding Lydia. Where texts are silent, coins speak. They reveal economic patterns, which cities traded, how wealth moved, what standards were followed. They hint at political shifts, at rising powers and fading dynasties. And they give faces to forgotten kings, not portraits, but symbols, choices, signatures in metal. The great museums of the modern world hold Lydian coins with reverence. The British Museum, the Louvre, the Istanbul Archaeological Museums, all preserve these small miracles of metallurgy. Scholars photograph them, weigh them, analyze their gold content, compare their dyes. Each coin becomes a voice in a larger conversation. What did Lydia believe? How did it shape the world? And still today, in the fields of Anatolia, new coins are found. A farmer's plough strikes metal. An archaeologist lifts a glimmer from the dust. A shape long buried returns to light. And with it, the story of Lydia grows one fragment richer. These coins are not relics. They are evidence, direct, durable, eloquent. And as long as they are held, studied, and remembered, Lydia will never be forgotten. The land of Lydia was rich not only in gold and silver, but in myth, stories woven into the hills, the rivers, the very soil beneath its cities. And nowhere did myth and money intertwine more intimately than along the banks of the Pactolus river, whose shimmering waters, legend claimed, once bore the weight of a king's curse. The tale begins with Midas, the Phrygian king whose name, like Croesus, became synonymous with wealth. Granted a wish by the god Dionysus, Midas asked that all he touched turn to gold. At first, he rejoiced. But soon, he found even food and water became lifeless metal. In desperation, he prayed to be freed. The god relented, telling him to bathe in the Pactolus. And so Midas did. As the story goes, the river took his golden curse, and from that day forward, its sands bore the glittering dust of electrum. For the Lydians, who would later gather that very metal to strike the world's first coins, the myth held more than poetry. It offered a divine origin, a sacred cause. Their wealth, it was said, came not from mere earth, but from the god's own drama. In truth, the Pactolus did carry electrum, naturally deposited by erosion from the nearby mountains. But myth gave it meaning. It turned a geological fact into a story of transformation, of gold born from regret, of wealth cleansed from curse. The river's shine became a symbol not only of abundance, but of humility. Another tale, no less powerful, surrounded Croesus himself. His name echoed through Greek lore as the richest man alive. Yet his end, like Midas, was marked by reversal. Defeated by Cyrus of Persia, Croesus was captured and condemned to the pyre. As the flames rose, he cried out to Solon, the Athenian sage who had once warned him, "Count no man happy until the end is known." According to the story, Croesus' words reached the gods. Rain fell, the fire was quenched, and Cyrus, moved by the tale, spared his life. Whether this happened is unknown. But the legend endured. And with it, a message that wealth, however vast, is never security. These myths did not stand apart from Lydia's coins. They shaped how the coins were seen, used, remembered. A piece of electrum, glinting in the hand, was more than money. It was a fragment of a river touched by gods. A piece of a king's ambition. A reminder of how fortune rises and falls. Even Herodotus, writing a century later, could not separate Lydia's wealth from its mythology. He told of kings cursed and warned of gold both blessing and burden. To him, coinage was not merely an invention, but a reflection of human nature, our desire to fix value, to hold it, to trust it, and yet never escape its dangers. And so, in Lydia, myth and money walked side by side. One gave the other purpose. One warned what the other could never prevent. And together, they left behind not just currency, but memory. In the writings of Herodotus, the father of history, the Lydians appear often not as conquerors, but as creators. He tells of their customs, their kings, and their fall. But perhaps most memorably, he gives Lydia a single, enduring claim to fame. They were the first people we know of to use coined money. It is a short remark, easy to overlook. Yet within it lies the recognition of a profound shift in civilization. Herodotus wrote in the 5th century BCE, 100 years after Croesus. By his time, coinage was already widespread across the Greek world. Silver drachmas clinked in Athenian markets. Spartan iron tokens served the austere city-state. But Herodotus traced this revolution not to his own people, but back to Lydia. They were the first, he says, to strike and use coinage of gold and silver. It is an extraordinary admission that this cornerstone of Greek daily life, this system that supported their democracy, military, and trade, had foreign roots. And not from distant Egypt or mighty Persia, but from a neighbor across the Aegean. Herodotus knew of Gyges, who seized the throne through intrigue. Of Alyattes, who stamped electrum. Of Croesus, who made gold and silver pure. He admired their wealth, but more than that, he recognized their innovation. His account blends fact with narrative, as was his way, but the outline matches archaeological truth. Lydia, through observation and need, had taken the uncertain practice of weighed metal and turned it into something repeatable, recognizable, and portable. Herodotus understood that coinage was not merely a technical achievement, but a social one. He also understood its danger. In his tale of Croesus and Solon, he warns against the illusion of wealth. Croesus, he says, believed himself the happiest of men, only to see his kingdom fall. The coins he struck, the temples he filled, the gifts he sent, none could save him from fate. Solon's lesson, which Herodotus repeats, is clear: riches do not guarantee wisdom, nor does fortune ensure peace. Thus, in Herodotus' telling, money becomes a mirror. It reflects not only prosperity, but the hubris it can invite. Even so, he does not condemn the Lydians. Rather, he marks them as pioneers, people who shaped the way others lived and thought. In doing so, he preserved their place in memory. Thanks to Herodotus, Lydia's invention was never lost in silence. His words, copied and translated across centuries, ensured that long after the coins themselves had vanished from hands, their origin was remembered. The Lydians, a people who first stamped value into metal, had left a legacy that even time, even defeat, could not erase. And in the voice of Herodotus, that legacy was spoken aloud. Long after Lydia's fall, its influence lingered, not only in the metal of coins, but in the words people used to describe wealth, value, and money itself. Language, like coinage, carries memory. And embedded within the tongues of later civilizations are echoes of Lydia's great innovation. The Greek word nomisma, meaning coin or money, comes from the root nomos, meaning custom or law. This reveals much. For the Greeks, money was not merely a material object, it was a product of social agreement, a convention shaped by human design and state authority. This reflects the very principle established in Lydia, that a stamped piece of metal gains value not only from its gold or silver content, but from the collective trust it carries. In Latin, the word moneta came to mean mint or coin, derived from the temple of Juno Moneta in Rome, where coins were first struck. But the concept it described, state-sanctioned, guaranteed value, followed the path laid down in Sardis. Even our modern words bear the imprint. Money, monetary, mint, numismatic, these all stem from roots tied to early coinage and its regulation. And while the names may differ across cultures, the idea remains consistent: money is not simply a thing. It is a message, a structure, a shared belief. The term stater, used for many early Greek coins, directly recalls the Lydian stater, the base unit of their electrum currency. Though later cities issued their own staters in silver or gold, the term retained its link to Lydia's standard. It became a measure, not just a name. Even the name of Croesus entered the language. In various European tongues, Croesus became shorthand for great wealth. To be as rich as Croesus was to possess almost unimaginable fortune. This linguistic legacy reflected not only the king's prosperity but the aura of gold and coinage that surrounded his reign. Such phrases, such terms, endure not because of force, but because of utility and memory. They capture what money came to mean: trust, exchange, power. And in every case, Lydia's innovation lies beneath the surface. Language, like coinage, spreads quietly. It crosses borders more easily than armies. It settles into the habits of daily life. And through it, the story of Lydia lives on, not in chronicles alone, but in the very words we use to count, to measure, to trade. In this way, the kingdom that once stamped lions into gold left more than wealth behind. It left thought, shaped into sound, and spoken still. To fully grasp Lydia's achievement in coinage, one must look beyond the shining surface of gold and silver. The brilliance of their invention was not just in metal, it was in the infrastructure of thought and practice that supported it. At its core, coinage required three radical insights. Abstraction of value. The Lydians were the first to understand that value need not reside purely in physical goods. Instead, it could be represented by a consistent token, a piece of metal that did not need to be bartered or weighed each time. This abstraction laid the foundation for every monetary system to follow. Standardization and scale. Before Lydia, even precious metals used in trade varied wildly in form and quality. Lydia introduced the notion that a currency could be standardized by the state, each coin equal in weight, design, and authority. This was no small feat. It required reliable access to metal, skilled artisans, strict oversight, and public confidence. Yet once established, this standardization allowed for scalable trade, both local and long distance. State authority as guarantee. What made a coin trustworthy was not merely its metal content, it was the mark of the state. The lion's head, the bull, the punches on the reverse, all these signified that the coin had passed through official hands. The Lydians, consciously or not, introduced the idea that money gains its legitimacy from centralized power. This principle became the bedrock of all state economies thereafter. But Lydia's innovation also required physical systems. Secure mints, likely within the royal complex of Sardis. Access to natural resources, particularly the electrum-rich sands of the Pactolus. Trained labor, to purify, measure, and strike coin with precision. Distribution networks, so that the coins could flow outward, to markets, to soldiers, to sanctuaries and allies. And beyond all of this, they needed one final element: public trust. The brilliance of Lydia's system was that it succeeded not by imposition, but by adoption. People accepted the coins because they worked. They simplified life. They sped up trade. They carried meaning. This was innovation not just in form, but in function, a quiet, daily transformation that reshaped the rhythms of an entire region. Later civilizations would improve on Lydia's system, introducing inscriptions, adjusting weight standards, experimenting with alloys. But none of that would have been possible without the underlying logic Lydia introduced, that money is more than metal. It is a shared idea, supported by structure, belief, and design. Thus, beneath every modern coin, every printed note, every digital transaction, lies the shadow of Sardis. Not just the image of a lion, but the echo of a thought. Perhaps Lydia's greatest legacy lies not in the metal it minted, but in the mental shift it set in motion, a transformation in how people thought about value, wealth, and exchange. Before coinage, transactions were rooted in the tangible. A sheep was worth so many jars of oil. A sack of grain could be swapped for tools. Everything was physical, direct, visible. Trade required negotiation, measurement, and above all, trust between individuals. But with the introduction of coins, that trust was transferred from person to the state. Value was no longer something observed or bargained. It was something carried, measured not by the item in hand, but by the stamp it bore. And with that, value became abstract. This was more than convenience. It was a shift in thought. Now, a piece of silver could stand in for wheat, cloth, labor, anything. The coin became a universal placeholder, a bridge between goods otherwise unrelated. And in that bridging, a new kind of thinking emerged, monetary thinking, assigning worth not by use, but by exchange rate. People began to think in units. Prices became numbers. Earnings could be calculated, compared, stored. Time itself became measurable, a day's labor worth 2/6 status, a week's rent worth 1 silver crosiad. The mind now worked in equivalents, in values assigned and transferred, not merely owned or consumed. This shift had deep consequences. It allowed for planning. A craftsman could save coin to invest in tools. A merchant could calculate risks and profits. A ruler could budget for war or peace. With money, future possibilities became visible in the present, an ability the pre-monetary world barely possessed. It also changed social dynamics. Wealth could now be measured, counted, displayed. Power could be consolidated not just in land or people, but in coin hoards. Inequality took new forms, no longer just who owned land, but who controlled capital. And so, social hierarchies reshaped themselves around this new abstraction. Even language followed. Terms like worth, cost, profit, price began to appear with sharper meaning. These were no longer metaphors. They were tools of everyday reasoning. This mental shift was not immediate. It unfolded over generations. But its origin lay in those first stamped coins of Lydia, when the lion's head came to mean more than a ruler's pride. It meant a new way to see the world. A world where numbers replaced weights. Where trust became transferable. Where value lived not only in things, but in thoughts. And that world, born quietly in the river-fed hills of western Anatolia, would never be the same. Long after the last Lydian coin had been struck, its imagery lingered in the memory of the ancient world, particularly the lion, whose roaring presence had once marked the very first money. The lion was not chosen by chance. To the Lydians, it symbolized royal power, courage, and divine favor. As the emblem of the Memnad dynasty, it stood guard not only over the throne of Sardis, but over every transaction, every exchange of value in the markets of the kingdom. It roared in silence on stamped electrum, its image repeated with such frequency that it became visually sacred, a token of trust, a face of the state. But its meaning spread beyond the boundaries of Lydia. As Lydian coins passed through the hands of Greeks, Phoenicians, and Persians, the lion's head, once a local mark, took on a broader role. It became associated with certainty, reliability, and centralized strength. In time, other cultures began to use lions on their own coinage. Not always in imitation, but in recognition of what the image had come to mean. The Greeks, for example, adopted a range of animal and divine symbols for their coins, yet the lion remained a persistent figure. On coins from Cyzicus, from Miletus, from places where Lydian trade had long touched, the lion echoed. Even the Persians, who struck the royal archer on their darics, kept something of Lydia's clarity in the simplicity and strength of their imagery. Beyond the coin, the lion entered cultural consciousness. It appeared in sculpture, in textiles, in jewelry, no longer just as a creature of myth, but as a symbol of trust, exchange, and shared value. It was a memory, not of a beast in the wild, but of a kingdom that had dared to stamp meaning into metal. And this resonance was not confined to image alone. The very concept of coinage, its structure, its logic, its royal backing, became culturally embedded. Cities that once traded only in goods began to think in coins. Temples that once accepted only sacrifices began to accept stamped metal. Laws, markets, even myths began to bend around this new center. Coins entered ritual and symbolism. They were placed in graves, given as offerings, used in dowries, in oaths, in ceremonies of state. The act of giving coin took on meaning beyond transaction. It became a gesture of recognition, of connection, of shared culture. In this way, Lydia's coins outlived Lydia. They endured not because the state that made them endured, but because the ideas they carried were absorbed into the ancient world's very sense of order. And so, the lion, cast in electrum beside the bull, beneath the stars, over the hills of Sardis, became more than a symbol of a king. It became a symbol of what money could mean. By the time Lydia had faded into the memory of empire, its coinage had already laid the monetary foundation for the civilizations that followed. The principles it forged, fixed weight, state authority, standardized design, became the bedrock on which ancient economies were built. The Greeks, who once received Lydian coins as foreign instruments, soon embraced and expanded the model. They developed their own systems, innovated with denominations, and introduced inscriptions and civic emblems. But beneath the flourishes, the Lydian logic endured. Every Athenian tetradrachm, every Corinthian stater, every coin struck in the polis of Hellas followed the template first tested in Sardis. When Alexander the Great swept through Asia, he inherited not only territory but a financial structure. The mints of Sardis and other Persian cities, once Lydian, were preserved and repurposed. Alexander's coinage, issued in vast quantities, relied on weights and purity standards that could be traced directly to Croesus' reforms. His empire, stitched together by roads and military might, was also stitched together by money. Later, Rome adopted coinage with similar devotion. The Roman denarius, the aureus, the sestertius, all were part of a system that depended on the Lydian model of trust through uniformity. Roman coins bore imperial faces, Latin inscriptions, images of victory and divine favor, but their essence, measured value guaranteed by the state, echoed Sardis. This foundation made possible the expansion of complex economies. Cities could tax efficiently, empires could pay armies across distances, laws could enforce contracts in terms of fixed amounts. Money became not only a medium of exchange, but a medium of governance, of justice, of social structure. What began in Lydia as a practical solution, how to make electrum easier to use, became a theoretical solution to organizing societies. In this way, Lydia's coinage was like architecture, not an ornament, but a frame. It shaped how the world moved, not just gold and silver, but labor, food, ideas. It allowed civilizations to scale, to specialize, to plan. And this foundation endured not because it was imposed, but because it worked. Its reliability, its logic, its flexibility made it indispensable. It entered law codes. It entered thought. It entered ritual. Long after Lydia's palaces had crumbled, its coins still passed from hand to hand. And with each transaction, the silent structure it had built remained, invisible, but unshaken. From the rivers of Lydia to the borders of Rome and beyond, the invention of coinage wove a thread through history, unbroken, though often unseen. a thread that connected cultures, shaped economies, and transformed how people understood the world around them. This thread did not run in a straight line. It coiled and branched, was taken up and reinterpreted, passed through cities, states, and empires. Yet its essence remained the same, a metal, shaped by human hands, bearing the mark of trust. The Lydians did not foresee the future when they first struck stamped electrum. They acted from need, to simplify trade, to establish certainty. But what they created transcended its origins. Their coins became templates, adopted and adapted by civilizations far beyond their own. In Persia, the Daric and Siglos extended Lydia's model into Asia. In Greece, coinage became democratic, issued not by kings, but by cities. In Rome, money became imperial, bearing the face of Caesar and flowing through provinces from Britain to Syria. Even after the fall of Rome, the thread held. Byzantine emperors minted solidi in gold. Islamic caliphates introduced dinars and dirhams, bearing calligraphy instead of images but maintaining the Lydian principles of weight, purity, and authority. In medieval Europe, silver pennies carried the marks of kings and bishops. And with the rise of global trade, coins traveled farther than Lydia ever imagined, crossing oceans, shaping colonies, underwriting the rise of modern finance. In each era, coins changed form. They bore new images, served new systems. Yet always, they were recognized, not just for their metal, but for the trust they carried. That trust, born in Sardis, remained their core. And the thread did not end with metal. Paper money, introduced in China and later adopted in Europe, carried the same logic, value guaranteed by the issuer. In time, even physical forms faded, replaced by numbers on screens. Yet behind every transfer, every payment, every digital balance, lies the same ancient principle, a system built on trust, sustained by consistency, shaped by design. This is Lydia's true legacy. Not the gold alone, nor the lion's image, but the continuity of the idea that value can be held, measured, and shared. That money, once born, lives not in vaults, but in the minds and agreements of people. The thread, though stretched across centuries and cultures, has never broken. It began in a quiet river valley, beneath a hilltop city, in the hands of a king who dared to stamp trust into metal. And it continues still, silent, steady, strong. Not all great innovations arrive with noise. Some come quietly, not with conquest, not with declaration, but with usefulness. The Lydian coin was one such invention. Born not from ideology, but from necessity, it changed the world more deeply than most weapons, most treaties, most monuments. It began with a simple problem: how to make trade easier. And from that, the Lydians crafted a solution that touched every part of life: commerce, governance, thought, memory. They did not invent wealth, but they invented a new way to understand it, to measure it, to carry it from one place to another, and from one age to the next. That is the essence of innovation, not just making something new, but making something lasting. Something that becomes so deeply woven into daily life that its origins are forgotten. Something that, once created, seems inevitable. What makes the Lydian invention so remarkable is that it required no grand philosophy, no revolutionary doctrine. It required only observation, repetition, and care. A recognition that people needed trust, and that trust could be made visible. A lion stamped into electrum became that trust. And from that moment forward, people began to think differently. They thought in units. They planned with precision. They related to one another not only through shared goods, but through shared value. This was not just economic change, it was mental, social, civilizational. And it was achieved without the wheel of war. Lydia did not spread its coinage through empire. It did not force its money into foreign hands. Rather, it let the coins speak for themselves. And they were understood in Sardis, in Miletus, in Delphi, in Babylon. In time, the world accepted the Lydian method because it was better, simpler, more reliable. That is the mark of true innovation. Even in defeat, Lydia's creation endured. When its kings were gone, its cities occupied, its language fading, the coin still passed from hand to hand. The system lived on because it sold something real. Not every civilization leaves such a legacy. Some build high walls. Some carve statues. Lydia minted a thought and gave it to the world in metal. It was the quietest of revolutions. But it changed everything. In the dry hills and river-fed valleys of western Anatolia, a quiet transformation took place. There, in a modest kingdom named Lydia, the world's first coins were struck. Not with fanfare, not with ceremony, but with purpose, stamped in electrum, measured in trust, carried in open hands. This was not merely a tale of metallurgy or trade. It was the beginning of something deeper, a new way of thinking about value. From the lion-stamped electrum of Aliats to the refined gold and silver of Croesus, Lydia forged more than currency. It forged confidence. A system where people could agree on worth without bartering, where value could be divided, stored, and exchanged with ease. Coinage changed how humans related to each other. It made trade faster, taxation fairer, armies stronger. It made economies measurable, wealth visible, power portable. It allowed for planning, saving, investing. It turned rulers into guarantors, markets into systems, and metal into meaning. The genius of Lydia was not only in what it made, but in how quietly it made it. Without war, without decree, without conquest, Lydia offered a better way, and the world accepted. From Persia to Greece, from Rome to Byzantium, from coin to paper to digital, the logic remained, a token of trust, a shared belief, a unit that made strangers equal. The Pactolus still flows, though it no longer bears gold. Sardis lies in ruins, its stones weathered by time. But the idea that was born there endures. Every coin in every pocket, every number in every account, carries a trace of that first spark. Lydia did not seek to change the world. But it did. In silence. In metal. In trust.